Hey all, so we're back with another Spotlight with Context, and today we are talking about the Maker, the evil, seriously twisted version of Mr. Fantastic from the Ultimate Universe. The Maker is also, for those of you who like to keep track, the first champion designed by a new member of the team, Caban Windshear. You may have seen him on the recent live stream, but yeah, we're happy to have him on the team, and this is a really strong start to his time with us. So getting right into the attributes, survivability of 3. A lot of this here depends on the maker's power control and his sig for the evade stuff. That kind of comes out to, you've heard me say this before, a little bit above average, and I think that is what that 3 rating entails, but there's not a ton here to keep him really tanky. Damage of 4. The maker is generally not going to be setting too many speed records, but his damage is really reliable. Most of his damage is red numbers, so it scales with his critical damage and with his attack rating, but doesn't require him to crit, ignores armor, isn't subject to duration reduction, isn't in the form of debuffs. For the most part, his damage just kind of works. And so once you know what you're doing with him, you're going to get reliably above average damage pretty much all the time. And that's going to be enough a fair amount of the time in Battlegrounds, but definitely pretty much anywhere in war that you would need it. Ease of use, too, this is kind of going to fit a theme, right? The Maker is not that difficult to use if you are just trying to finish a fight. And so if you are using him for his utility, especially his immunities, then you don't really need to worry about this. But if you are trying to get through the fight, really maximizing his damage and his power control, then that does require a fair amount of advanced gameplay and specifically a lot of timing around when you use and charge his heavies. And so I think an ease of use score this low is quite fair. Utility of 4.5, we've already talked about some of these. There's evade in here to keep him safe. There's multiple immunities. There is power control, there is heal block, there is cowardice, there's 2 new effects called instant siphons and special power drain that we'll get to. This is a very utility rich character who is excellent at shaping the battlefield in his favor. And then defender strength of 2. There is an evade that you might have to watch for. There's a mine that can deal some damage, but the mine's damage is way, way less on defense. The evade, you can work your way around. This character isn't that dangerous on defense. The 2 largely comes from their animations just being a little weird. Moving directly into the abilities, the Maker has altered his being and developed an immunity to Neuroshock and reversed controls. So, this is the first character in the game who is immune to Neuroshocks. So, that makes him excellent for Onslaught, Jean Grey, Captain Britain. Really good for Jean Grey because he's also immune for reverse controls if that's been giving you some trouble. Yeah, just huge piece of utility there. The Maker hates luck. He cannot land critical hits. So, like I said, you don't really care about his critical rating. His critical damage rating does matter, and we'll get to that later. And all personal effects and the stun from the parry mastery have 125% ability accuracy. So, the latest in a long line of texts to say harsh words to Domino in particular. Moving on to planning charges, like Mr. Fantastic before him, this version of Reed Richards does have persistent charges that he uses to activate pre-fights. So they both start with 4. The makers only go up to 8, but not a big deal here. In the pre-fight menu, you can choose up to 3 of these passives. There are 3 total choices, same as Mr. Fantastic, to inflict on the opponent at the start of the fight. Each costs 1 persistent charge and is inflicted even if a different champion enters the fight. So, like Mr. Fantastic, he can donate these. And then for each fight he or a teammate wins, he gains a planning charge the next time he enters a fight. If that sounds a little weird, I'll be perfectly honest. It is a tech limitation. We can't actually update his persistent charge until he fights again. So it may be a little bit difficult for you to track how many charges he has at any one point. We apologize for that, but it will update the next time he actually enters a fight. So you will be ramping steadily throughout the quest, even if you are not using the Maker. And then onto those passes themselves, planned obsolescence, you can only get one of each. So unlike Mr. Fantastic, these do not stack. Want to call that out right away. But that also means that you get the full value up front. They last 15 seconds and are refreshed when the opponent is knocked down. Again, very similar to Reed. And going through the three, we start off with a 45% special power drain passive. This is similar to what Prowler has or what Captain America can get with the Vision synergy. This is just when the opponent activates a special, 45% of their remaining power is drained away. So, very helpful against power efficiency effects. Next up, we have a 14% instant siphons passive. So this is similar to Reed's debuff siphons passive, but only applies to instant damaging effects. So those are damaging effects that specifically have a duration of 0. We've seen this before in a few places, but this applies to things like, Guardian's instant shock, Maker's instant plasmas. It also protects him against incoming instants, right? It increases the potency of outgoing instants and reduces the potency of incoming ones. And so that means that if you were fighting somebody like Mephisto, who, fun fact, his aura is actually a bunch of little instant incinerates, you'll take less damage from that. And there's a bunch of other applications here, especially if you are donating this to other characters. But powerful new effect, so don't let that small potency fool you. And then lastly, a 20% cowardice passive. As you know, this just reduces the special multiplier of the opponent. So this is specifically not red numbers. This isn't all damage during a special attack, but this is the hit damage of the opponent's specials goes down by 20%, right? It's very similar to a weakness, but only applies to the hit damage of their specials and is generally very powerful against mutants, right? So the important thing is that the potency of all of these passives is halved unless the attacker is a tech champion or specifically one of the Maker's outgoing synergy partners. Now, obviously, the Maker is a tech champion and so gains full potency for himself, but this also just means it is easier to donate all of these effects to techs or to his named synergy partners than it is to donate it to anyone else. It'll work on anyone if you're just looking for the presence of the effect. But if you want the actual function, those are his best targets. Potency scales with the rarity of the maker. If different versions of a passive are applied, only the strongest one triggers. So this is the same exact language from Mr. Fantastic's kit. You can't double up on these. You can't have a bunch of different instant siphons. You'll just get whatever the single best one is that you try and donate. Now, moving on to tactical evasion. When the Maker would perform a well-timed block against a basic attack, he invades the attack instead. When he evades a basic attack, inflicts a stun passive for 3 seconds, which is then removed when the opponent is struck twice. When this stun would be inflicted, meaning when the evade happens, whether or not the stun does, the stun and the evade go on a shared cooldown for 8 seconds. So this is exactly the same as the way Kate Bishop's evade and stun works, right? And it serves the same purpose in the Maker's Kit. This is to give you clean openings for your heavy attack and to allow you to charge it for a good long time. But it's also just a very powerful ability for controlling the battlefield and getting extra openings, same as we have seen on Kate or other characters like her. So moving on to that heavy attack we just mentioned, Maker's heavy attacks do not add to his combo meter. So if you stick to only heavies, you can actually keep your combo at 0 with him, which is a little bit weird, but has some nice utility against certain mutants, such as Onslaught, right? The final hit pauses the Maker's planned obsolescence passives for 5 seconds and inflicts a heal block debuff for 8 seconds. So similar to Reed, if you knock them down with the heavy specifically, those passives you just refreshed are paused and you get some extra duration out of them. And Maker always gets that heal block, whether or not there are passives on the opponent. Additionally, the final hit inflicts an instant plasma, which deals a certain amount of damage, but then that's multiplied by his critical damage multiplier. So it's a little bit difficult to predict exactly what this is going to do until you go into the fight, just to call that out ahead of time, especially because you're not only running this through his critical damage multiplier, you're probably increasing it with the instant siphons passive that you applied before the fight. But this red number can get quite big, so just calling that out ahead of time, this is a big damage source. You can go through a fight just parry heavying with the Maker. So moving on to the special one, all this does, besides hit the opponent, is deploy a plasma mine in front of the Maker. So let's go ahead and talk about that plasma mine. He can only have one of them, you don't have to worry about stacking up a bunch. But when the opponent moves onto the mine, it triggers and inflicts an instant plasma, again dealing energy damage, multiplied by his critical damage multiplier. So as a defender, this only deals 1% of the damage. You can largely ignore it. Now, once the plasma mine triggers, it has to recharge, but it recharges while the Maker is charging his heavy attack, or by a small amount when either champion is struck. So you don't lose access to the mine if for some reason you're taking a fight where you can't charge your heavy, but it does recharge much more efficiently during his heavy attack. And so if you can, what you want to do is find places such as after your evade and stun, where you can charge heavy for as long as possible, just releasing it at the end of the window so that you are reducing the cooldown on this mine by as much as possible. That is a lot of the skill expression with the Maker, is managing to do this while also keeping the opponent near the mine so you don't have to reset it. But one thing that does make this a little bit easier is that when you trigger the mine, you not only get that plasma, you also inflict a suppression passive on the opponent for 30 seconds. You can get up to six of these, which gives you 60% combat power rate reduction, which is a reminder because most opponents actually have a 120% combat power rate, means that you're effectively going to be having the power that you give them whenever you hit them. This also is part of the Maker's limited defensive threat because suppression works both ways and is going to reduce how much power an opponent gains from hitting the Maker. So that can slow some things down, but generally not going to be a big factor in the fight. Now, while suffering from any of the Maker's suppressions, the opponent is also inflicted with a 75% potency power reroute passive, meaning that, like Bastion before him, the Maker not only reduces your power, he gains a portion of that combat power rate reduction he's inflicting on you. So when you're at that max stacks of 60% suppression on the opponent, the Maker is gaining 45% combat power rate for himself, right? 75% of that total. Additionally, power reroute scales with the Collar Tech Mastery, giving an extra 3% for each rank. So if you have the opponent at 6 suppressions and you have Collar Tech maxed, then you are actually gaining 60% extra combat power rate, which is pretty darn strong. So now we get to the reason why you're going to want that extra combat power rate, because the special 2 is your damage cash out, right? On activation, it removes the cooldown on the plasma mine, so it is instantly ready for business. And that matters because as long as the opponent is not blocking, which is mostly something to make the defensive side of things easier, then triggering the plasma mine during this special 2 overcharges it, increasing its base potency by 200%, plus an additional 40% for each personal suppression on the opponent. Then the mine is destroyed by that overcharge, right? So the damage loop of this character is generally special 1, build up some suppressions, cash out with the special 2, special 1 again to get that plasma mine back up, maintain your suppressions, special 2 ad infinitum, right? And so being able to move through that special 1, special 2 loop more often with that combat power reroute is just going to help you that much more. Now let's talk for a second about this line base potency. We've seen this before, but what that means is that basically this increase is baked into the effect, is baked into that plasma that happens when the opponent's pushed over the mine by this special. And that means that it's in a separate step from anything affecting the potency of that plasma. And that matters a lot because what this means is you go through this full potency, this full base potency increase, and then you get the full benefit of the instant siphon, right? So if you take the mine's base potency, right, increase it by 200% here, plus another 240% if you have if you have the max stacks of suppressions, then you're getting an increase of 440%. And so the damage of that mine is increased by more than a factor of 5. And then that is multiplied by what the instant siphons is giving you, right? So if we use the example in this spotlight of 14%, you get that times 5.4 and then times 1.14. So that line is really important because it makes the maker's instant siphon passive a lot more impactful to his special 2 output than it would be if this was just increasing the potency, right? Base potency is a really important piece of text. And then lastly, in this section, the maker gains a planning charge when triggering an overcharged mine and gets an extra one for each 3 personal suppressions on the opponent. So you can ramp the maker's persistent charges just by winning fights with anyone on the team, but you can also turbo ramp him by cashing out here on the special 2. And I think generally you can kind of assume in a shorter fight, you're probably going to be able to get 2 charges here because getting to 3 suppressions is not a big deal. It might be harder to get 3 in any kind of short fight without really min-maxing things. But then in longer fights, you probably can get up to that 3. And there's no limit on how many times this happens per fight. So if you enter a fight with the Maker, the very first fight, and you've used 3 of these passes on the opponent, so you're down to 1 charge, it is definitely conceivable that if you have time to throw 3 special attacks, you get all the way back up to 8. But you don't need to, because as a reminder, the Maker gets a charge when he wins. So if you can throw 2 fully ramped special 3s and get 3 planning charges from each of them in that first fight, then you can come out of that first fight with 8 charges. That may not make a difference all that often, but there are probably going to be some war maps where that 8th charge off of the first fight does come in handy. Now, as a reminder, the special 2 does almost nothing if you haven't thrown the special one beforehand, right? Every single bullet here requires the mine to be on the field. So be very careful with the Maker to not be pushed past that special 1 to the special 2, because the special 3 also requires you to already have a mine on the field. And so you really need to make sure that you land that first special 1 before doing anything else. So now that we've mentioned it, the special 3 re-triggers the Maker's planned obsolescence passives. So if you have lost them at some point during the fight, you're going to need the special 3 to get them back. And then at the end of the attack, the Maker moves an existing plasma mine behind his opponent and empowers it for 12 seconds. The empowered plasma mine automatically recharges every zero point 0.5 seconds. So you can get a lot more damage out of it and specifically a lot more suppressions. Now, onto the signature ability contingency plans. First up, we have a nice little damage scaler for when the Maker's fighting a stun immune node. Whenever that stun fails to be inflicted or is removed before its duration expires, you get an energy vulnerability passive and yourself goes stun immune for 4 seconds. So if you're fighting something like Stunning Reflection, which then removes that stun as soon as it's there and tries to stun you, nope, you don't get stunned because you go stun immune and you get a little bit more damage because of it. Now, that damage is probably not something that I would chase most of the time because it's going to be a rare fight where the energy vulnerability is actually helping you come out ahead relative to just having the stun and being able to charge your heavy more. right? But it does kind of help to make up for it and mitigate that tempo loss of not having the stun. The next three bullets all refer to the same mechanic, which is this special evade charge. So, as the name implies, this allows you to evade a single hit during a special attack. This doesn't trigger during a well timed block, so you can avoid using it. And you can also just dex the special and not use it that way, right? This isn't like Hood where it triggers on decks and you burn through them the first time the opponent throws a special. If you are on top of things and either using well timed blocks or dexes, you can hold on to these until it really matters, but then that's a nice safety net to help you out. Additionally, you gain an extra charge for every 60 signature levels, so if you have a max sig maker, you start the fight with 4 of these. That's a pretty strong safety net. All of these special evade charges are removed when struck by a heavy attack, so be careful as an attacker, but this is mostly there to give you a way to not get wrecked when you're fighting him as a defender. And then the Maker also gains a special evade charge when the Plasma Mine is triggered during his special attacks. So most of the time you're going to want to trigger the Plasma Mine during the special too, but note that this doesn't say when the mine is overcharged. It says triggered during any of his special attacks. So if you push them over Plasma with a special one, you're not going to do as much damage as if you used a special two, but you're going to do some, and you will get that special evade charge back, which sometimes might be more important. And then we talked about this a bit with Nico, but instead of strengths and weaknesses, we're going to be using these champion summaries going forward. So just kind of running through that real quick. As an attacker, you're going to want to use your pre-fights for that extra damage and utility. You want to use your special one as soon as you can to place a plasma mine. Force the opponent through that mine a few times to build up your suppressions and deal damage. Used well timed blocks to evade and stun the opponent, which is going to allow you to charge heavy attacks, to use the mine more often, and then hit them with a special 3. As a defender, he's immune to Neuroshock, so don't use a mutant with Neuroshocks against this tech defender. I feel like you can probably follow that. Avoid the Plasma Mine if you can, and you want to make sure that he is not evading your basic attacks because that stun will happen, as with Kate. And then when awakened, make sure that you heavy early before you throw specials, or you're going to want an evade counter. That's basically it. On to synergies with Doctor Doom and Superior Iron Man. The Maker at the start of each fight and when activating a special 3 inflicts a non-stacking ensnare passive for 15 seconds. This is refreshed on cooldown, so you can keep it up along with the rest of the passives. For Doctor Doom, heavy attacks can no longer critically hit, but instead gain 40% attack rating. There are some places where this is better, some places where this is worse, but where it's better, it's huge. And then for Superior Iron Man, knocking down the opponent with a heavy attack grants a non-stacking cruelty buff for 10 seconds. Note that this is a superior cruelty buff, so it hooks into parts of Superior Iron Man's kit that are looking for superior buffs, but it is not one of his core superior buffs, so it doesn't hook into the whole thing. There's some nuance there, but if you've played Superior Iron Man a fair bit, you probably understand the distinction I'm making there. So Council of Reeds with the Maker Mr. Fantastic. For the Maker, increased attack rating by 0%. Potency of the synergies increased by a flat 30% for each other Reed Richards on the team. This is the same text that Mr. Fantastic has for the Council of Reeds, right? And so for Reed, the potency increase in all of those Council of Reed synergies accounts for all versions of Reed Richards, including the Maker. So basically, this is just, hey, that synergy that Mr. Fantastic already has, I'm part of the club too. It's a large attack increase, though, so worth it to both of them, and you get a lot more coverage out of having two different characters contribute to that. Reading complications with the Maker and Invisible Woman. For the Maker, debuffs last 25% longer. This is really nice for his heal block. And then for Invisible Woman, while her force field is active, she gains offensive combat power rate. So very similar to what Mr. Fantastic and the Invisible Woman have. Rock and Scorch with Thing and Human Torch. For the Maker, Plasma Mines also inflict a Plasma debuff, dealing 20% of its attack rating as energy damage over 8 seconds. So if you're facing something like Polka Dot Power that needs a debuff, this helps you out there. This also benefits from the Invisible Woman synergy, so there's a nice little Fantastic Four loop there where that's boosting debuffs, and this is a debuff. For Thing, when he reaches 0 rock stacks, he gains a Grit passive for 8 seconds. Obviously, the primary way that you are going to do this is by throwing a special attack when you have 15 or more rock stacks and you remove them all. So, if you're playing Thing properly, this kind of reads as you gain Grit when you throw a special. Now, Thing already has the ability to nullify unstoppable buffs, which is something that a lot of people forget is in his kit. But if you are dealing with passive unstoppables or somebody who's nullify immune, such as Thing versus Thing for some reason, then that ability falls short, but this doesn't, right? Grit is going to allow you to hit into those unstoppables, and so it's a nice expansion of that ability in his base kit. For Human Torch at 20 temperature, temperature cannot decrease for an additional 4 seconds. So this is basically a quality of life thing for Torch. You're already trying to keep his temperature up and playing around that. And in his target matchups, you don't have to worry about temperature at all anyway. So this doesn't do a whole lot. But when you're outside of those target matchups and you're trying to stay at your peak, this makes it that much easier. And then we have a couple generic synergies with Venom, Kang, Sunspot, Nick Fury, Iron Man, Thor, Hawkeye, and Miles Morales. But it is worth mentioning every single one of those named characters because all of them gain full potency from the Maker's pre-fights. So, Tech Champions and anyone we just talked about is gaining full benefit here, and that can matter quite a bit for some of them. And that's the Maker. I'm not going to talk too much about stat focus or relics. We already said he doesn't care about crit rating. Crit damage, however, he does quite a bit. And he has a heal block, so the Vision Relic helps out. Kind of enough said there. But yeah, let me know what y'all are feeling about this one. I know a lot of people have been wanting him to come to the contest for a long time, and I've been really curious to see how exactly we do another version of Mr. Fantastic. I think some people were expecting him to be science, which would make it harder to really deliver on that. But I think him coming in the tech class has really given him room to shine on his own, be similar but still different. And I think Windshear did a good job with that. Let me know in the comments what you're thinking. And until next time, thank you so much for watching and take care.